the government coming? We need gasoline. With gasoline, you're going to bring food and gasoline and clothes and gasoline to run generators. Bring us generators. Bring us something to get heat. We're going to die if we get killed with the weather. We're going to die. We're going to freeze. We have no cars. President Obama, please listen to us down here. We are going to die. You don't understand. You've got to get your trucks here on this corner.
Buckle your seatbelt. It's time for another episode of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, water filters, bug-out bags, and first aid kits. Use coupon code PREPPERRECON for 5% off your entire order at CampingSurvival.com.
When disaster strikes, it's too late to prepare. PrepperRecon.com offers MOLLE-compatible individual first aid kits for your home, auto, or bug-out bag. These kits have everything you need to address a traumatic injury, including an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, EMT shears, suture kit, Steri-strips, tourniquet, ACS chest seal, tough strip bandages, gauze, and so much more. $89 includes shipping. To buy your individual first aid kit, go to PrepperRecon.com and click the store tab at the top of the homepage. Order today before it's too late.
Today's guest is David the Good. David's an author, blogger, and YouTuber. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, you've written some fantastic books on gardening. I'm reading Create Your Own Florida Food Forest right now. Can you tell us what a food forest is?
Yeah, a food forest it's also called a forest garden. And the idea is instead of a regular garden that you would have to tear up and replant every year, you plant a long-term ecosystem. You would look at the levels of a forest. You know, there's a top layer, there's a middle layer, there's a lower layer, there's vines, there's roots, there's wildflowers around the edges. You take all those things and say, hey, how can I plan a forest where everything in the forest is edible or useful in some way? So you take the design of a forest, which is a self-perpetuating thing. A forest doesn't need tending or fertilizing or anything else. And you would replace it with food crops and useful crops and recreate it as a garden. And in about 3-4 years, you start to reap a little bit. And then 4 or 5 years, you start to reap a lot. And then 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you've got a garden that will just be there even long after you're dead. It's really an awesome system. Use the productivity of nature to create a garden.
And the book is written for folks in Florida, obviously, but the concept would work anywhere in the country, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the thing is to look at what your native forest looks like and look at what edible trees and plants grow in your area and say, how can I plan this? Like say you look across the street and you've got hickory trees and oak trees growing in the wood. Well, chestnut trees and pecan trees, chestnuts are cousins of oaks. They grow very similarly. Pecan tree is a cousin of hickory, close enough that you can actually intergraft them. So rather than a less productive oak or a hickory where you have a lot more processing for the nuts, you might say, hey, the top level of my forest, the tall trees, is going to be pecans and chestnuts. And then you look at the next layer of the forest. Oh, let's see, we got sumac, we got wild plum, we got crab apple, and maybe, who knows what else is growing in there. Let's take some shorter trees. Let's put in some mulberries, some persimmons, maybe some loquats. Depends on your climate. You might tuck in peaches, apples, pears, things like that as the next layer of the forest. Then you look a little lower and you say, okay, what kind of edible shrubs are out there? Well, I've got wild blueberries growing in the neighborhood. Maybe I'll plant cultivated blueberries. Blueberries seem to like it here. So you plant some cultivated blueberries. Maybe you throw in something radical, crazy like gummy berries from Japan, or you might put in some native berries. There's a berry down in Florida. It's called Simpson Stopper. It's used in landscaping. It's got an edible fruit. So I planted those in the yard. Hey, it's got an edible fruit and it's a native. That's kind of cool. So you just kind of mix in the layers of a forest, but you make it all edible. And what you end up with is a set of woods that look beautiful and will feed you long term. Whereas, your sweet corn, if you walk away for a week or two from your sweet corn bed, it's probably going to be ruined. They're gone. But you can walk away from a forest for a couple of years and come back and you're still going to find food there.
And so once you get it up to this sort of minimum level, it'll sort of
become self-sustaining, and that's going to cut a lot of work out of it. So you get a little extra time. What are some of the other advantages that a food forest might have over a conventional orchard or garden?
If you're going to talk, on the prepper angle of things, the cool thing about a food forest is that a lot of what's in it will probably not be readily recognizable as food. You may have nut trees and fruit trees and things like that, but it's not necessarily, you've got a big brushy mess of forest or jungle growing in your yard. People don't think food. People think food when they see neat rows and watermelons and tomatoes and cages and stuff, and they go, I'm going to rip that off. But a forest, people will be, they might steal some of the apples, but are they going to steal the basswood leaves? The basswood's edible. Or are they going to steal your bamboo with the edible shoots? Probably not. Maybe your arrowroot, they're not going to see that. They might steal a couple of your persimmons when they're underripe and eat them and never want another persimmon in their life. But they don't. It's just not recognizable as food. Another big benefit to the food forest system is, I believe it goes back to God's design. He put us in a garden to begin with, and it wasn't a garden with rows of corn and cabbages. It sounds like, from the descriptions, it was a garden of fruit trees. It was a garden of food, long-term food that you just had to tend. You didn't have to work the soil, till the soil, turn it over, plant, save seeds, try again every year. It wasn't until we left the garden that we ended up tilling the soil and tearing it up. But if you've got bunch of fruit trees that you're putting in, all of your work on the food forest garden is going to be in the first year, 2 years, 3 years, until those trees get established. You got to make sure they stay watered. You got to make sure that you keep the grass back from them until they have enough shade to fight the grass and keep it back on their own. You got to make sure that the deer don't come in and knock the trees down when they're little or whatever else. But once the trees get to a certain size, they pretty much take care of themselves. Not all trees do that, but I'll tell you, fruit trees are generally a lot less work. You might prune or something a couple of times a year if you feel like it. But it's not much work compared to double digging a garden bed or dragging a tiller all over the place every year and starting over. Your gardening gets easier as you get older rather than the same amount of hard work every year. So that's a big benefit. Another benefit is your irrigation is not needed like it is with annual gardens. Your weeding isn't needed like it is with annual gardens. Your work level goes way down after the first few years, and it pretty much starts to take care of itself.
And how much space do you need to start a food forest?
That's a good question. The nice thing about a food forest is you can take the concept and you can shrink it to a smaller scale. I've wanted to design a really tiny patio garden as a food forest with the layers. But instead of making, say, my top tree a pecan tree, I might make my top tree a Japanese persimmon tree. A Japanese persimmon tree only gets usually about 12 foot tall. So say you took a Japanese persimmon tree and you said, that's the top of my forest, right there, 12 foot. And then you went and you got yourself a couple of dwarf mulberries and planted them next to it. And then you planted a couple of blackberry bushes, maybe a blueberry, or a couple of blueberries for the pollination. You might plant yourself a peach tree over there. Peaches can be pruned down and kept pretty small if you work at it the first year or two. Then you plant maybe sweet potatoes as a ground cover, and suddenly you've got food beneath the ground. You've got food at knee level, chest level, and then up overhead to where you're reaching. So you can kind of design it. Just think how much work people put into putting in a hedge or putting in landscaping around their house. What if you redesign the landscaping? Usually you've got some little border plants around a couple of big plants that you're showing off, and maybe a tree with a ring of azaleas around it or whatever you like. Do the same thing, but make it edible. It's not that much work to take care of landscape plants. You just treat it the same way and go small. So, you're not going to get as much food out of a small food forest, but you will get a decent amount of food for a small amount of work.
And you just mentioned mulberries, and I, there's the song about all around the mulberry bush, and I hear a lot about mulberries, and a lot of popular street names and things like that. But I guess I've never eaten a mulberry. What's a mulberry taste like, and what different kinds of things can you do with that?
Okay, if you took a blackberry and you took out the bitterness, and so you just had a sweet blackberry with none of that sour bitter flavor, and you put it on a tree that made 20 gallons of berries or 40 gallons of berries, then you have an idea what a mulberry tree is like. The red mulberry is native to North America, and the founding fathers were very interested in mulberries. Actually, some of them planted mulberries on their plantations because they were impressed with such a productive, basically a berry tree. The fruits are about the size of the end of your thumb, very comparable in size to a blackberry, but they hang on a tree. The tree is a beautiful shade tree most of the year, broad leaves. Leaves are also good for animal forage, fodder. Very fast-growing tree. It will bear often within a year of planting. I've started them from cuttings and had them fruiting at a foot tall. And a lot of fruit trees, you got to put in 4, 5, 6 years. Mulberry, we had a 2-year-old mulberry in the backyard. It made us 6 gallons of berries when it was 2. So we picked, that's what we measured, because the children actually ate a lot of berries off the bottom of the tree, so we didn't count them all, but I put 6 gallons into the freezer. So, very good tree. People don't like the mulberry because they say it's a messy tree. And I think that's just kind of a dumb first world problems way to look at the tree. Oh my goodness, it's so messy, it's purple everywhere. I said, come on, that's food. That's food falling from the sky that you didn't have to work for. Don't plant it over your BMW, but plant one in the corner of the yard, and then when it goes into fruit, I mean, my gosh, think of the price of organic berries. We tried blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, and fought with them for the first couple of years on our property. And about that point, that mulberry tree came into fruit, and I gave up on most of those other berries. I still have them because I like a few blueberries and a few blackberries, but the productivity level is simply impossible to match. You can make all your organic berries for a year. I actually calculated it based on the price of blackberries. Our tree made about $300 market value of organic berries in its second year. So, that's pretty good for a $20 tree.
That's fantastic, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of preppers are looking for, because, if you're obviously people that are reading your book, they're not expert gardeners, and they're they're looking for some ways to be a little more self-sufficient and to be able to provide for themselves and be a little less dependent on an absolutely failing system. And they've got all these other things that they're trying to learn. They're trying to learn comms, and they're trying to, handle their own investments, because, obviously the most of the money managers out there are just out there for the fees, and they don't really care if you live or die as long as they get your fees. And,
Yep.
And education's a mess. So, people are trying to, figure out how they're going to homeschool their kids. And there's just so much going on that, sometimes we just want something that we can plant and it's just going to work, and we don't have to be out there 2 or 3 hours a day. And so, that might be one of those really great things for people that are sort of in that position.
Oh, I think so. It's one of the top 3 fruit trees I recommend, just hands down. It's if you can pretty much grow it anywhere in the country. There's a variety of mulberry that will grow on your property. So, plant one. The native red mulberry, which also, it has black fruit, but they call it the red mulberry, can become a very tall tree, 40 to 60 foot tall. So that may not be what you want. So you can cut it when it's small and keep it smaller, or you can plant a black mulberry, which is more a 20 to 25 foot tree. There's also dwarf varieties that get about 8 foot tall. There's even a white fruited variety that doesn't stain, and the berries taste kind of like raw honey. They're pretty hard to find, but it's the white mulberry, and it's excellent tree. I like them all. I've planted about 10 on my property so far. They're also, one thing that's really cool is if you plant them over a chicken run, because the tree is so productive, the mulberries will fall in there and feed the chickens for the month that the tree is fruiting. So even if you don't go and pick the mulberries, you can feed your chickens mulberries, for almost a month. And the chickens will just hang out underneath that tree and eat them.
So you could basically go on vacation that month.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, chickens are fine. They got mulberries.
It's time for a quick break, and we'll be right back. The dollar's lost over 90% of its purchasing power since 1971. Silver, on the other hand, has proved to be a very stable form of wealth preservation over the years. And where do you buy silver? Silver.com, of course. Silver.com offers fantastic prices on silver and gold.
And what are the other two
Yep,
fruit trees you recommend?
Yeah, these I would recommend for Florida, coastal Georgia, bottom of Alabama, Southern California, through Texas. And those three trees are, it's the mulberry, the loquat, which is also called the Japanese plum. Very, very easy to grow, productive fruit tree. It grows up into zone 7, but it doesn't fruit consistently past about USDA zone 8. So you may be able to grow it in Georgia, but you might not get all that much fruit. But it's a wonderful tree and has very few problems. And then the third one is the Japanese persimmon tree. I absolutely love that tree. It's a persimmon. If you get the fuyu types, you can actually eat them like an apple off the tree. Very sweet. Pretty much the closest thing you can grow to a mango in a more temperate climate, as it'll take the cold. Very few pest issues. Goes to sleep early in the fall, so it doesn't get hit by late frosts or early frosts, and it wakes up late in the spring, so it doesn't, the bloom doesn't get taken off like peach blooms often get taken off by frosts in the spring. So Japanese persimmon tree is a really great tree. And actually, if you grow the astringent types, which you cannot eat comfortably until they're mushy, they have more sugar and more flavor to them. And they were actually bred for drying. So as a preserving fruit, you go for an astringent variety. For a fresh eating fruit, you go for a fuyu type non-astringent. So loquat, mulberry, Japanese persimmon. Those are my three go-to pivot point trees that I plant first.
And does the loquat, it taste similar to a plum?
It's interesting. It's a little bit like a plum. It's sweet tart. It's in the same greater family as plums and apples and a lot of our temperate trees. It's almost, if you dry it, it's almost like an apricot, that sweet tart type flavor. And I haven't ever had a fresh apricot, so I'm guessing that the fresh flavor is a little bit like an apricot as well.
And what about the persimmon? I guess I've never eaten any type of persimmon. What would that texture be similar to, or taste?
The persimmon has a crisp texture to it. The non-astringent type. There's two types. The astringent type, if you eat it, pleasant. And a lot of people who have tried persimmons before got them underripe, tasted them, and said, "That's the most disgusting fruit in the world. I'll never eat it again." And it's very unfortunate because, if you were to go eat a green banana out of the store, it doesn't taste all that hot. So you got to get it when it's actually ripe, and then it's amazing. And it's like if you took honey and sunshine. That's about what the flavor tastes like. Just very sweet, a little bit of spiciness to it, almost like a pumpkin pie. It's a very good flavor.
Honey and sunshine. That just sounds delicious.
Great tree. And the fruit's about the size of a tomato. It's an orange fruit.
You mentioned nitrogen fixers in the book. Can you tell us what that is and give us a couple of examples of easy to grow nitrogen fixers?
Yes, nitrogen fixing. If you want to plan a food forest that's more self-perpetuating. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with the story of George Washington Carver. And the land that was all farmed out because of cotton, and so George Washington Carver planted peanuts to restore the soil. And the reason peanuts restore the soil is they have bacteria that actually live on the roots, make little colonies on the roots of the peanuts. And those bacteria are able to take nitrogen out of the oxygen, or out of the air. They take it out of the air that's in the soil, and they convert it, or fix nitrogen. They fix it into a form that plants can use. And one of the primary nutrients that plants need is nitrogen. So you've got a plant that makes nitrogen on its roots. So what they would do is grow peanuts, and you grow peanuts for a few years, the nitrogen levels in the soil will go up. Even one crop of peanuts, if you plow it all under, you can often plant afterwards without fertilizing the next crop. Well, peanuts aren't the only thing that fix nitrogen. Beans and peas fix nitrogen. and there's a lot of trees in the greater bean and pea family, the Fabaceae family, that also fix nitrogen. And they have relationships with these same or similar bacteria, and they'll make little knots on the roots that are making nitrogen all the time. So if you plant a tree that is a nitrogen fixer, once it makes those relationships in the soil with the soil bacteria, the soil around that tree increases in nutrition. So if you plant, say, a cassia tree next to your apple tree when you put in your apple, the cassia tree grows fast and green because it's got all that nitrogen it's taken out of the soil. You cut the top of the cassia off. Every time it starts to shade your apple, chop that cassia back, take those branches, throw them around the base of the apple tree as mulch. You're mulching from the top, but every time you damage that cassia tree and cut it back a little bit, some of the nitrogen nodules will fall off of the roots, and some of the roots will rot in the soil, and they will feed the apple tree. So you can actually green up that apple tree by cutting back the cassia. So you let the cassia work for the nitrogen. You can't eat the cassia, but you can use it as basically fertilizer grown in place and mulch grown in place. So you're mulching and fertilizing at the same time by planting a nitrogen fixer, which the permaculture folks will also call a chop and drop tree. You chop the top of it off, drop it as mulch. So you're composting in place from the top and adding nitrogen in the root zone of the apple tree. Just really a cool concept, and if you apply it in your design, it just makes the system more like a real forest and makes everything happier.
Do you recommend growing from seed or established plants?
I like growing from seed because it's cheap. Sometimes you may need a quick start, so you might, go and get some little things and plant them. But a lot of the nitrogen fixers grow pretty fast from seed. So I've collected seed from a wide variety of different nitrogen fixing species. You can look, I think I have a list, some of the nitrogen fixers mentioned in the book. I also have them mentioned on my website, which is thesurvivalgardener.com. At The Survival Gardener, if you write nitrogen fixer, and it's nitrogen-fixer or nitrogen-fixing into the search bar, you'll see a post I did on my food forest where I was putting different nitrogen-fixing species into the mix. And it's going to change according to where you are located in the country, which trees fix nitrogen, but if they're in the greater bean and pea family, a lot of the time they do. Like black locust, you can grow it up north as a nitrogen fixer. It doesn't grow so well down in South Florida, maybe, or Southern California. Down there, you might pick another one, enterolobium, or you might pick pigeon peas or something like that. A short-lived, fast-growing nitrogen-fixing tree.
And what about critters? Which ones help and which ones hurt the garden?
Yeah, the immediate inclination when we see we've got a pest issue, or you've got bugs and things eating your plants, is to get out the toxins and kill everything. And that's not the best approach. The best approach to dealing particularly with insects is to have lots and lots and lots of insects, which sounds counterintuitive because you look around your garden and all you see is stink bugs and you're like, oh my goodness, I've got a serious problem here with insects. I got to kill all the insects. Well, maybe that year that's the case, but in general, the more complicated the ecosystem is, the better it balances itself. If you look around a forest, you'll see a lot of healthy plants and a lot of interactions going on that, there's a lot of bugs in the woods, but you don't see all the leaves on the oak trees getting eaten. There's always insects there eating the oak trees, but they're kept in control by other insects. So the more habitat there is and the more insects there are, the more that things can balance out. It's just like the flora in your intestinal tract. If you get sick and they give you a prescription for antibiotics, you take the antibiotics, they'll say you got to eat some yogurt with those antibiotics because you've got to recolonize your gut with good stuff. You need beneficial bacteria. Well, it's the balance that does it. And so if you've got a lot of places for good things to hide, say ladybugs, praying mantises, lizards, snakes, all those kind of things that people go, toads, all that kind of stuff. You put a pond in, you've got some frogs, you suddenly have a lot of stuff there to eat the insects. Well, I think you're never going to see in nature like those great big cornfields in Iowa where it's just endless corn. And they have had to engineer so many toxins and herbicides and other things to just grow corn. It's very unnatural. They have to basically, almost carpet bomb the place to keep everything going. And that's because if you get a corn pest and he eats the corn, and he lays his eggs in the soil, and then the next year you've got twice as many corn pests and 1,000 times as many corn pests and 1,000,000 times as many corn pests. There's nothing to eat but corn. And so if something comes in and says, hey, I want to eat that corn, there's nothing to stop it. It's not like there's some corn and then there's, a row of hazelnut trees and then there's a couple of oaks and then there's a patch of wildflowers and then you got some more corn. If you have a system like that where you alternate all your blocks here and there, you've got a lot of place for the predators to live and to go after the pests. And so I've had people get on my case for saying, hey, how can you like snakes? Snakes are disgusting and creepy, and I don't like them, and they eat the chicken eggs and that sort of thing. I said, well, I look at it like this. Which do I prefer, one rat snake or 100 rats? How many rats during the course of the year is that rat snake getting rid of? How many little baby mice is it swallowing? And how many other problems is it taking care of that I don't see? Is it climbing up into the squirrel's nest and eating the squirrels that were going to steal my peaches next year? Probably. So if I take the shovel out and kill it, it's like, hey, I just bred 100 rodents this year. I took away the predator that was taking them out. So the number one thing I would say you can do for your garden is to leave some weeds along the edges, leave some perennials along the edges, leave some places for the insects to live, and don't mow all of your lawn. Leave patches here and there where you've got a lot of life going. And we've seen our pest issues drop way down, and there's a lot of insect life going on in my yard.
Hey, Preppers and Patriots, that's the end of the first half of my interview with David the Good on survival gardening. Check back next week for the rest of the interview. God bless and happy prepping.
In the days of Noah, Book 3, Perdition. A global empire arises like a phoenix from the ashes of the world that was. The emerging order is unified by a new global currency and a single world religion, which are mandated by an imposed UN treaty. In the interest of unity and peace, a zero-tolerance policy for dissenters is enacted and strictly enforced. Hunted down like common criminals for daring to resist the state, Noah Parker's group will have to rely on faith and wits to endure the powers of darkness which are quickly consuming the earth. Buy your copy of The Days of Noah, Book 3, Perdition, by best-selling author Mark Goodwin in paperback, Kindle, or audio edition from Amazon.com today.